So, as I mentioned previously, it was international law. It was the UN that formed after World War II, with the crumbling of the British Empire and the rise of America, that came together and they instigated the partition plan. And the partition plan was very unjust in its nature. You had, from the onset of the Balfour Declaration in 1917 to when Britain gained mandate over Palestine in 1923. So, when Britain gained mandate of Palestine in 1923, 6% of the population were Jewish, right? They were indigenous Jews, right? The contention was never with Jewish people. 6% of historic Palestinians before the British mandate were Jews. When the British mandate came into effect until right before the Nakba, the population of Jewish settlers rose from 6% to 33%. And they were encouraged from across the globe to migrate. It's really interesting. Within the Balfour Declaration itself as well, Arthur Balfour himself stated that this will not come at the expense of the Palestinians, right? The erection of a Jewish state and the creation of a homeland for the Jewish people, a national homeland, will not come at the expense of the Palestinians. And Winston Churchill himself was instigated with the task of actually going to Palestine and actually reassuring Palestinian leaders, don't worry about it. Nothing will happen to you. You won't be disadvantaged by any of this. And at the same time, the Jewish settlers increased their formation of settlements. They started to form their own organizations, their own league. And of course, the Palestinians started to realize that actually Zionism was an existential threat to their existence, because they're seeing the rise of these settlers, these foreign settlers from across the globe coming into their land, setting up their own institutions, not formally a part of the government, because the government back then was Palestinian, was under the British mandate. So this was after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And the Palestinians became very, very worried about this. What is going on? These small enclaves of Jewish communities are forming, and they weren't benign communities. They were clashing with the Palestinians, clashing in the worst kind of form. From 1936 to 1939, you had the Arab Revolt, the Great Arab Revolt, against a lot of the crimes that were being committed by paramilitary Zionist organizations. So you had organizations like the Haganah, Stern, Irgun. These were all different kinds of organizations who actually were responsible for the ethnic cleansing during the Nakba. So the population of Jewish settlers by 1948 was 30%. But the UN, it turns around and what does it do? It grants 55% of that land to the Jewish settlers. And when the Nakba transpired, you had 85% of the Palestinians that were living in what is now considered the wrong state, right? 85% of them were made homeless, were forcefully expelled and rendered in refugee camps. And you have around 1.5 million Palestinians today living in refugee camps in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Turkey even, and living in the worst conditions because they're stateless. They're not recognized as, obviously they're not granted citizenship of the country. And I don't believe they should be, because they are Palestinians and that is their identity, and it should remain as such. But you can imagine, living as refugees, depending on humanitarian aid for your survival. That's 1.5 million of them. And the remaining Palestinians, notwithstanding the Palestinians that were internally displaced, from places like Haifa, from places like Jaffa, from places like Nazareth, who were forced into the Gaza strip, which is an area which is the size of Sheffield. Literally, it's 385 kilometers. So small, right? Housing 1.5 million Palestinians, and into the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which houses 3 million Palestinians. They were massacred, 100,000 of them massacred. So are we against Jews having their right to their own homeland, to self-determination? Actually, what you see is the Zionists have tried to frame the Palestinians' right to return. Believe it or not, they've tried to frame it as anti-Semitic. Why? Because they say that Palestinian right to return will deny a majority Jewish state. And if it denies a majority Jewish state, then it's denying Jews the right to self-determination. Hence, Palestinian right to return. The Palestinians have been there for decades and decades are not allowed, because imagine a Palestinian, right, who's being oppressed. On top of being oppressed, they're told by their perpetrators, you are anti-Semitic for opposing our colonization of your land. That's how absurd it's become. So when we look at the wrong state, we see that in order to survive, it needs to expand. So further than even just historic Palestine, it went into Lebanon. In 1982, it invaded Lebanon. It invaded South Lebanon. And in 1983-84, Ariel Sharon found himself at the heart of the capital in Beirut, and that's before Majzarat Sabra and Shatila, the Sabra and Shatila massacres occurred, where 4,000 Palestinians were butchered in broad daylight for 3 days, for 3 consecutive days. Ariel Sharon and his terrorist organization went in there and they butchered the Palestinians, the majority of whom were women and children, because they actually, before that, 2 weeks before that, they issued a statement asking the Palestinian men to leave, which I find very interesting. It's almost like they went there purposefully to kill the women and children. And when Ariel Sharon was asked, where do your borders lie? He said, our borders are where our tanks stand. Our borders are where our tanks lie. So actually, from the Nile to the Euphrates is our slogan, right? Our slogan is to expand as much as we can. If we can expand into Jordan, if we can expand into Iraq, there's no limit to their greed for lust and power, because they recognize that in order to defend itself and to survive, it needs to expand. If it's limited by its geographical expanse, their survival is at stake. Their survival is threatened. And this comes in very important when we discuss the ceasefire and the victory of the ceasefire and what that means in terms of the limitation of the geographical expanse.